There is a burden that leaves no visible wound, yet inside it carves its way through you the way water shapes stone. You know it. It rests on your shoulders in the quiet hours, when the world sleeps, and the illusion of rest feels like something reserved for other people. You have carried something for so long that you no longer remember what it feels like to put it down. What happens to a woman who never had permission to fall because there was no one beneath her to catch her? This path does not offer quick answers or comforting reassurances. It leads instead to a realization that shifts everything. You have avoided it for years because it requires you to face a truth that reshapes your entire story. At the end of this inward journey, there is no rescue coming from outside. There is only the encounter with the part of you that never wanted to be strong, only wanted to be held. And this is where real healing begins. You wear armor that no one sees. It was not forged in a single moment. It formed layer by layer, year after year, in the quiet realizations that help was not coming. Maybe you were 8, maybe 12, old enough to sense something was missing, too young to name it. There were adults around you, physically present, but emotionally distant, like figures behind glass. They looked at you, but they did not see you. In depth psychology, this absence leaves a mark. When the nurturing principle withdraws or becomes unreliable, the child adapts. Sometimes the child becomes the caretaker. Sometimes she becomes the strong one, the steady one, the one who senses the cracks in the system and steps in before anyone asks. Something decisive happens in that moment. You decide without words that you will not break. You will not need. You will not ask. The psyche of a child is remarkably adaptable, but adaptation always comes at a cost. You learned that vulnerability was dangerous, that asking for help might be ignored, that tears could fall and still no one would come. So you stopped crying, you started fixing, you became the problem solver, the mediator, the reliable one. Strength became survival. What began as a strategy slowly became identity. Jung called this the persona, the mask we wear to function in the world. For you, it was never a mask you put on and removed. It fused to your skin. The strong one, the dependable one, the woman who holds everything together, the one who never collapses. You became so good at it that you forgot there was someone underneath, and the world around you adjusted. People relied on you, they leaned on your capacity, they admired your endurance. No one asked how you were, because the answer seemed obvious. You are strong, you can handle it. But your body knows the truth. While your mind keeps organizing, planning, providing, your body speaks in the only language left to it. Fatigue that sleep does not repair, tension that has no clear cause, a nervous system that never truly powers down. Always alert, always, anticipating the next demand. Even when you are alone, your muscles do not soften. Even when nothing is happening, something in you remains braced. This is not weakness. It is vigilance learned too early. Somewhere deep inside, an ancestral alarm still whispers, if I let go, everything falls apart. If I relax, something bad will happen. If I stop holding it all, there will be consequences. And so you keep holding. You keep managing. You keep being the pillar. But pillars crack. There is a grief buried beneath your competence, a quiet ache for the version of you that never got to be small, never got to be comforted, never got to say I can't without fear. That part of you did not disappear. She adapted, she hid, she waited. Healing begins not when you become stronger, but when you allow yourself to admit you were never meant to carry it all alone. The armor that protected you is also suffocating you. It kept you alive. It helped you survive. But it also kept intimacy at a distance. It kept softness locked away. It convinced you that love must be earned through usefulness. Jung spoke of the return to the self as a descent, not an ascent. You do not heal by becoming invincible. You heal by meeting the child who made the vow to be strong at any cost. You heal by acknowledging the loneliness she endured. You heal by allowing her to feel what she was never allowed to feel. You are not weak for being tired. You are not broken for needing rest. You are not selfish for wanting to be cared for. These impulses are not flaws in your character. They are signs of something long denied. There is a difference between strength and self-abandonment. You have confused the two for a long time. Strength that grows from wholeness feels grounded, flexible, alive. Strength that grows from fear feels rigid, relentless, exhausting. The burden you carry is not just responsibility, it is identity. If you put it down, who are you? If you are not the strong one, the capable one, the one who never falters, what remains? That question terrifies you because it exposes how much of your worth became tied to endurance. But beneath that fear is freedom. Beneath the armor is a woman who does not want to prove her resilience anymore. She wants to live without bracing for collapse. The first step is not dramatic, it is subtle. It is the moment you notice how tense your shoulders are and allow them to drop. The moment you admit you are tired without apologizing for it. The moment you say no and let the silence follow without rushing to explain. You do not have to dismantle everything at once. You do not have to abandon responsibility. But you do have to question the belief that you must always be the one holding the sky. The woman you are becoming does not abandon strength. She redefines it. Strength is no longer the refusal to fall. It is the courage to rest. It is the willingness to trust that the world does not collapse when you stop carrying it alone. The armor can loosen, not all at once, not without fear, but gradually. And beneath it there is still a heart capable of softness. Still a body that longs to feel safe without vigilance. Still a soul that does not want to survive forever. It wants to live. And this is where your real journey begins. If I rest, everything will fall apart. That belief has lived inside you for so long, it feels like fact. It feels logical, responsible, mature. But it is a paradox that the deeper psyche understands better than the conscious mind. What we resist with the greatest force tends to follow us with the greatest persistence. You resist weakness, so weakness becomes your shadow. You refuse to fall, and therefore you live permanently on the edge of collapse. The energy you spend holding yourself together is the same energy that blocks your healing, because healing would require you to remove the armor, and removing the armor feels like dying. It feels like surrender. It feels like losing control, and control has been your lifeline. This pattern doesn't only live inside your body, it shows up in your relationships with unsettling clarity. You attract people who need rescuing, not deliberately, not consciously, but with the precision of a magnetic field. The emotionally unavailable partner, the friend who is always in crisis, the family member who relies on you again and again. Why does this keep happening? Because this dynamic is familiar. Because it is the role in which you feel safest. If you are the savior, you remain in control. If you are needed, you do not have to risk being vulnerable. If you are the strong one, you do not have to expose the trembling child inside you who once needed someone and found no one coming. It is important to understand this is not a conscious strategy. You do not wake up thinking, "Today I will find someone who drains me." This unfolds at a deeper level, where the unconscious weaves its patterns. Jung described the repetition compulsion, the mysterious tendency of the psyche, to recreate unresolved conflicts in the hope that this time the outcome will be different. Unconsciously, you choose people who mirror your original wound. A part of you believes that if you try harder this time, love better this time, sacrifice more this time, you will finally receive what you were denied back then. Recognition, safety, being seen, being enough. But it does not work. It cannot work, because healing does not happen through repeating the pattern. It happens through breaking it. And breaking it begins with a painful realization. You are not giving purely from generosity. You are often giving from fear. You are not helping solely out of love. You are helping out of terror that if you are not useful, you will not be wanted, that your value is attached to performance. This awareness cuts deeply, but it is a necessary cut. There is a kind of loneliness that does not depend on circumstances. You can be surrounded by people and still feel an existential isolation. It is the loneliness of never having been truly seen, not the persona, not the strong woman, but the fragile being beneath it all, the child who still waits for someone to say, "You do not have to carry this alone. I am here." Jung spoke of the hunger of the soul, an insatiable longing for genuine resonance, for someone who sees your whole truth and stays. Perhaps your caregivers were physically present but emotionally distant. This form of trauma is confusing because there are no obvious bruises, no dramatic abandonment, no clear villain, no one hit you, no one left in a literal sense, but they were not fully there, and a child needs presence as much as air. You grew up with a strange mixture of guilt and abandonment. Guilt because you feel you should not complain. After all, nothing terrible happened. Abandonment because something essential was missing. Emotional neglect leaves no visible scars, yet it shapes your relational blueprint. You learned that love must be earned, that closeness requires effort, that safety is conditional, so you became hyper-attuned to others. You learned to read moods before words were spoken. You sensed tension in the air like an animal scanning for predators. This vigilance kept you safe once. It made you competent, responsible, impressive, but it also disconnected you from yourself. When you are always scanning the emotional landscape of others, you lose track of your own inner weather. You become fluent in everyone else's needs and illiterate in your own. And then one day, you find yourself exhausted, resentful, confused about why you feel unseen even though you give so much, because giving has replaced being. There is a difference between loving someone and trying to earn your right to exist through them. When you are drawn to broken partners, part of you is unconsciously trying to repair the past. If I can heal this person, maybe I can finally heal that original wound. If this person chooses me, maybe it means I was always enough. But no partner can repair what was formed in childhood. They can love you, but they cannot rewrite your nervous system. That work belongs to you. The breakthrough begins when you stop trying to get from others what you must learn to give yourself. When you recognize that your exhaustion is not a sign of weakness, but a signal that your identity has been built around endurance instead of authenticity. You do not help because you are bad. You help because helping once kept you connected. But now it is costing you. There is also anger beneath your competence, a quiet, suppressed rage at having had to grow up too soon, at having had to be the adult in situations where you were still a child. This anger frightens you because it threatens your image of being kind, calm, reasonable. But anger is not your enemy. It is a boundary that was never allowed to form. When you begin to reclaim it, you may feel selfish, cold, different. People who were accustomed to your endless availability might react with confusion or disappointment. They may call you distant, changed. You are changed. You are no longer willing to abandon yourself to maintain connection. This is where real transformation begins, not in dramatic declarations, but in subtle shifts, in noticing when you're about to overextend and choosing not to, in allowing someone else to sit with their discomfort instead of rushing in to fix it, in tolerating the anxiety that comes when you are not the rescuer. At first it feels wrong. Your nervous system may interpret it as danger, but gradually something new forms, a sense of solidity that does not depend on being needed, a sense of worth that is not attached to usefulness. You begin to understand that love without self-betrayal is possible, that you can care deeply without dissolving, that you can say no without losing yourself. The loneliness you feared begins to transform. It becomes solitude instead of abandonment. It becomes space instead of punishment. In that space, you meet the part of you that never wanted to be the strong one, the part that wanted to be chosen without performing. And as you sit with her, as you allow her to feel what was postponed for years, something shifts. The compulsion to rescue softens. The need to prove diminishes. The fear of resting loses its grip. You realize that if you rest, the world does not collapse. If you stop saving, you do not disappear. If you allow yourself to be seen in your fragility, you do not break. You begin to live from fullness rather than fear. And that is the moment the burden starts to lift, not because your life becomes easier overnight, but because you are no longer carrying it alone inside your own psyche. You are no longer the child trying to hold up the sky. You are the woman who understands that strength does not mean constant vigilance. It means integration. It means being able to be powerful and soft, capable and needy, independent and connected. The repetition ends when awareness begins, and awareness has already begun in you. You learned early how to move through relationships by shrinking yourself. You learned to lower your needs, to hide them, to label them as excessive or inconvenient. You absorbed the unspoken rule that love is conditional, that it must be earned through performance, through competence, through never becoming a burden. So you carry everything alone, even when there are people beside you who might genuinely want to help. Because accepting help would mean admitting that you need something, and needing feels like failure. In your quietest moments, you may ask yourself why personal success feels strangely empty. You have achieved what you set out to achieve. You are capable, independent, maybe even admired. And yet there is a hollow space inside that no accomplishment seems to fill. No promotion, no praise, no external validation satisfies it. Because the wound is not external. It lives in the place where the child inside you still waits to be loved not for what she does, but for who she is. This is the turning point. Jung called it individuation. Not an abstract theory, not mystical language, but a deeply personal and often painful process of becoming who you truly are. Individuation requires that the false self slowly dissolves so the authentic self can emerge. It asks a terrifying question. Who am I without the armor? Who am I if I no longer have to be strong all the time? That question can create panic. Your identity has been built around strength. The role of the capable one became your foundation. If you lay it down, who are you? It feels like death. And in a way, something does die, but it is not your essence. It is a protective structure, a survival strategy that once kept you safe. As a child, you had no choice. As an adult, you do, but letting go of that identity is frightening. The psyche does not surrender old roles easily. Jung described the shadow as everything we repress in order to function. In your case, the shadow is filled with emotions you were never allowed to feel. Anger, exhaustion, resentment, deep disappointment, anger at those who were not there when you needed them, anger at yourself for carrying so much for so long, exhaustion from years of holding everything together, resentment toward those who assumed your strength was limitless and automatic. You may have spent decades suppressing these emotions because you believed they would make you weak. But repression does not eliminate feeling. It traps it. Those emotions become like an underground river pushing against the walls you built. They consume energy. They create tension in your body. They whisper at night when the world is quiet. When you begin to allow these emotions space, something shifts. At first, it may feel destabilizing. You might feel more vulnerable, less certain. But beneath that vulnerability is authenticity. Beneath the trembling is life. There may be a moment when you truly break down, not symbolically, but physically. tears that feel ancient, fatigue that overwhelms you, a sense that you cannot carry this identity one more day. That moment is not your collapse. It is the beginning of healing. Because in that moment, you stop fighting your own unconscious. You give your inner world permission to speak. The shadow is not your enemy. It contains the vitality you buried in order to survive. When you integrate it, you do not become weaker, you become whole. Wholeness does not mean perfection. It means embracing contradictions, strong and tired, capable and needy, independent and longing for connection. Individuation is not about discarding your strength. It is about choosing it freely rather than wearing it as armor. The child inside you did what she had to do. She adapted. She learned to be impressive instead of vulnerable. She became useful instead of seen. That adaptation was brilliant. It protected you, but now it limits you. The emptiness you feel is not a failure of success. It is the signal that your soul is asking for something deeper than achievement. It wants authenticity. It wants intimacy that does not require performance. It wants to rest without fear that everything will fall apart. As you move through this process, relationships may change. People who depended on your endless availability may feel unsettled when you begin to set boundaries. You might feel guilt when you say no. Guilt is often the first layer of liberation. It is the nervous system adjusting to a new pattern. The individuation process demands that you separate from unconscious loyalties. You may have been loyal to family dynamics that required you to be the stable one, loyal to friends who relied on your competence, loyal to an image of yourself as the unbreakable woman. Breaking those loyalties does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop betraying yourself. You will confront your fear of being ordinary. Without the constant effort, who are you? Without the praise for being strong, what remains? At first, that space feels empty, but slowly something more grounded appears. A quieter sense of worth that is not tied to output. The integration of the shadow releases energy. The anger you once suppressed becomes clarity. The exhaustion becomes information about your limits. The resentment becomes a signal that something must change. These emotions transform from enemies into guides. There is grief in this process. Grief for the childhood you did not have. Grief for the years you spent proving yourself. Grief for relationships that thrived on your overfunctioning. Allowing that grief is not self-pity. It is truth. As you allow yourself to feel, your body begins to soften. The constant vigilance eases. Your nervous system slowly learns that rest does not equal danger. You may discover desires you buried long ago. Creativity, playfulness, sensuality. Parts of you that had no space in survival mode. You might notice that your definition of love shifts. Love is no longer about being indispensable. It becomes about mutual presence, about being seen without performing, about being allowed to falter. This transformation is not linear. There will be days when you want to retreat into your old role, when being the strong one feels easier than confronting vulnerability. That is normal. Individuation is cyclical. You revisit old patterns at deeper levels until integration feels natural. You are not losing yourself. You are shedding what was never truly you. The woman emerging through this process is not weaker. She is more deliberate. She chooses when to be strong rather than being compelled to be. She accepts help without interpreting it as failure. She rests without expecting collapse. The emptiness that once haunted you begins to fill, not with applause or achievement, but with self-recognition. You begin to see yourself not as a function, but as a being. And in that recognition, the burden lightens. You realize that you do not have to carry everything alone to be worthy. You do not have to earn love through exhaustion. You do not have to hide your needs to deserve connection. Individuation is not about becoming someone new. It is about returning to who you were before survival shaped you. Before you decided that strength was the only safe identity. The journey is demanding. It will require honesty. It will require sitting with discomfort. But it will also give you something you have never fully experienced: the freedom to exist without performing. The woman who walks this path does not abandon her strength. She integrates it. She becomes strong and soft, responsible and receptive, grounded and open. And for the first time, success does not feel empty, because it is no longer compensating for an unseen wound. It is simply an expression of a self that no longer needs to prove her right to be here. That is the real turning point. Not external achievement, not approval, but the quiet moment when you realize you can lay down the armor and still remain whole. You said I told you that you were carrying too much, and the truth is, you have been. You've been carrying weight that was never meant for one set of shoulders, and you carried it quietly, efficiently, without applause, without witnesses, for so long that the weight became normal. It became your posture, your personality, your identity. Admitting that is painful, because once you admit it, you can no longer pretend it isn't heavy. But that admission, as uncomfortable as it feels, is the first door to freedom. We were taught that collapse is failure, that breaking down means you weren't strong enough, that exhaustion is weakness. But from a Jungian perspective, collapse is often the necessary death of the false self. It is not destruction, it is transition. When the structure that was built on fear can no longer hold, it cracks. And what feels like falling apart is actually the psyche refusing to keep living in a shape that no longer fits. The I, old identity, the strong one, the reliable one, the one who never needed help, begins to crumble. And in the space that collapse leaves behind, something truer can begin to grow. Something not built on performance, not built on survival, but built on truth. Inside you, the small girl you once were still exists. She did not disappear. She did not die. She adapted. She stepped aside. She waited. She waits in that quiet interior space Jung called the soul. The part of you untouched by roles, untouched by expectations. She waits for you to return. And returning is not sentimental. It is psychological work. It is sitting with yourself and saying, I'm sorry. I'm sorry you had to grow up so fast. I'm sorry you didn't get to cry. I'm sorry I ignored you for so long because I thought being strong was more important than being real. Reparenting yourself is not about rewriting history. It is about becoming the loving presence you never had. You cannot change what your parents failed to. See, you cannot go back and give yourself what you needed. But you can choose, right now, to treat yourself differently. You can speak to yourself gently. You can respect your limits. You can take your needs seriously. You can allow rest without guilt. You can allow tears without shame. This is not weakness, it is integration. And integration requires responsibility, not for what was done to you, but for how you choose to live now. No one is coming to rescue you. And the deeper truth is, you no longer need rescuing. One of the hardest lessons in this journey is understanding forgiveness. Forgiveness is not moral superiority, it is energetic liberation. You forgive not to excuse what happened. You forgive to release yourself from carrying it. Resentment binds energy. Bitterness locks life force in the past. Forgiveness is the act of saying, I will not allow this to occupy my inner world any longer. It does not mean it was okay. It means you choose peace over prolonged attachment. This process is not linear. There will be days when you feel healed, grounded, steady, and then something small will trigger you. A tone of voice, a look of disappointment, a subtle rejection. And suddenly, you are back in old patterns. That does not mean you failed. It means healing moves in spirals. Each time you return to the same wound, you meet it with more awareness, more compassion, more capacity, and something subtle begins to change. You start noticing when you overextend yourself. You notice when you take responsibility for emotions that are not yours. You notice when you silence your own needs to maintain harmony. And this time, instead of automatically complying, you pause, you breathe. You ask yourself, what do I need right now? That question alone is revolutionary, because for most of your life you asked, what do they need? What will keep the peace? What will prevent abandonment? Now the axis shifts inward, and your relationship with solitude begins to transform. For years, loneliness felt like punishment, a reminder that something was wrong, that you were too much, or not enough. But gradually, solitude becomes something else. It becomes sacred space, not isolation, but presence. You begin to enjoy your own company, not because you don't desire connection, but because you are no longer abandoning yourself in its absence. The fear that everything will collapse if you rest begins to loosen its grip. You learn that stillness does not equal danger. That silence does not mean abandonment, that you can sit alone in a room and nothing catastrophic happens. Your nervous system slowly recalibrates. You are not constantly bracing. You are not always preparing for impact. You are not living at the edge of emotional survival. This is what true strength looks like, not hyper-independence, not emotional suppression, but regulated presence. You stop needing to prove that you can carry everything. You begin to choose what you carry. And something extraordinary happens when you stop performing strength. People either meet you differently or they drift away. Some relationships were built on your over-functioning. When you stop over-functioning, the dynamic collapses. That is not failure. That is clarity. You are no longer available for roles that erase you. The child inside you does not need you to be perfect. She needs you to be present, to say, I see you, to say, you don't have to earn love, to say, you are allowed to need. And as you practice this inner dialogue, something soft but powerful grows. Self-trust. Not the loud, performative confidence the world applauds, but quiet trust in your own rhythms. You begin to feel when something is off. You begin to honor fatigue instead of overriding it. You begin to set boundaries before resentment builds. The more you integrate, the less you react impulsively. You respond. You no longer chase validation. You no longer panic at distance. You no longer confuse chaos with passion. You choose connection that feels calm. You choose people who respect your limits. You choose love that does not require self-erasure. This is individuation. It is not glamorous. It is not quick. It is not painless. But it is real. And once you begin this return to yourself, there is no going back to unconscious survival. You will still have moments of doubt. You will still feel grief for the childhood you did not have. You will still encounter triggers. But now you have awareness. And awareness changes everything, because now, when you feel yourself slipping into old patterns, you can say, I don't have to do that anymore. You can choose rest. You can choose honesty. You can choose to disappoint someone instead of betraying yourself. And each time you do, you strengthen the most important relationship in your life, the one with yourself. You are not becoming someone new, you are becoming someone whole. And that wholeness does not scream for attention. It does not collapse under pressure. It does not disappear to keep others comfortable. It simply exists, steady, present, integrated. You carried too much for too long. Now you are learning how to put some of it down, not because you are weak, but because you finally understand that your life was never meant to be a burden you survived. It was meant to be a self you inhabit. You learn to rest inside your own presence without constantly reaching outward to fill what feels empty within. That is one of the deepest signs of healing, When you no longer need to stay busy to avoid yourself, when silence no longer feels like an enemy, but like a doorway, something fundamental has shifted. You are no longer running from your own interior landscape. You are beginning to inhabit it. At first, the quiet feels unfamiliar, almost suspicious. Your nervous system has been trained to associate stillness with danger, as if something might fall apart the moment you stop holding it together. But slowly, your body begins to understand a new truth. Nothing collapses when you rest. The world continues. The sky does not fall, and you are still here. You begin to feel at home in your own heart, not because everything is resolved, not because the past no longer aches, but because you are no longer abandoning yourself in the present. There is a subtle shift from survival to presence. You are not constantly scanning the room, not constantly adjusting your tone, not constantly calculating how to keep everyone else steady. You are simply there. And in that being, something reconnects, a thread to your essence that was always present but buried beneath obligation, beneath performance, beneath the belief that love had to be earned through strength. When you reconnect with yourself, your relationships inevitably change. They have to. The version of you that overextended, overfunctioned, and overgave is dissolving. And some people will not understand that. Some will feel confused, others irritated. Some may even accuse you of becoming cold or distant. But what they are really reacting to is the loss of access. They were accustomed to the version of you who responded immediately, who absorbed their emotional weight, who placed their needs above your own. When you begin to say no, when you stop jumping every time someone calls, when you create boundaries where there used to be open doors, the system shifts. That shift is uncomfortable, and it is revealing. It reveals who loved you for who you are and who relied on you for what you provided. It shows you which relationships were mutual and which were built on your overcompensation. Some connections will fall away, not dramatically, not always with conflict. Sometimes they simply fade because the dynamic that sustained them no longer exists. Letting go of those relationships can feel like betrayal, but often it is simply evolution. To make space for something new, something old must be released. And as that space opens, you begin to notice something else. New people entering your life, people who meet you differently, people who do not expect you to rescue them, people who do not require you to be the strongest one in the room. These relationships feel lighter, more reciprocal, more honest. They are not perfect, but they are grounded in respect. You are no longer valued for your endurance alone. You are valued for your presence. In this process, you may discover a capacity that has long remained dormant within you, the ability to receive. For someone who has always given, receiving feels foreign, vulnerable, almost dangerous. To receive means admitting that you need. It means allowing someone to show up for you. It means stepping out of the savior role and into something more balanced. True strength, as Jung understood, is not about one-sided giving. It is about integration, about holding opposites without collapsing into one extreme. Giving and receiving, independence and connection, strength and softness. Person who only gives is not powerful. She is incomplete. She is cut off from half of the human experience. Learning to receive is an act of courage, allowing someone to help you without feeling diminished, accepting a compliment without deflecting it, letting someone witness your exhaustion without apologizing for it. These are quiet revolutions for someone with your history. At first, it feels uncomfortable. Your body may tense. Your instinct may be to minimize your need. But each time you allow yourself to receive, the fear lessens. Your nervous system learns that vulnerability does not automatically lead to abandonment. And then, one day, something unexpected happens. You are sitting alone, perhaps in the early morning, perhaps in the soft light of late afternoon, and you feel a stillness inside that you have not felt in years. not the stillness of numbness, not the silence of suppression, but a deep interior calm. It does not mean your life is perfect. It does not mean your past no longer matters. It simply means you are no longer at war with yourself. That peace may not stay constantly. It may come and go. But once you have tasted it, you know it is real, and that knowledge changes everything. This calm is what Jung referred to as the deeper center of the psyche, the self, the part of you that was never broken, the part that existed before the world demanded that you be strong, the part that will remain long after every role falls away. When you touch that center, even briefly, you realize something profound. You are more than your history. You are more than your wounds. You are more than the responsibilities you carried. You are not defined by what you survived. From that place, your perception of others shifts. The people who hurt you begin to look different, smaller, more human. You begin to see that many of them were acting from their own unhealed places. Their limitations were not personal attacks. They were reflections of their capacity. This does not excuse the harm, but it frees you from being trapped inside it. You begin to understand that holding on to resentment ties you energetically to the past. Releasing it is not about absolving others. It is about reclaiming yourself. There is a maturity that arises from this perspective, a quiet authority. You no longer need to convince anyone of your worth. You no longer need to prove that you are strong. You simply are. And that presence is magnetic, not because you demand attention, not because you are louder, but because you are integrated. You are no longer split between the version of yourself that pleases and the version that aches. You are whole. That wholeness alters how you move through the world. You respond instead of react. You pause instead of panic. You trust your internal compass instead of outsourcing your decisions to the approval of others. You begin to make choices that reflect your truth, even when they are uncomfortable, even when they disrupt old expectations, even when they disappoint people who preferred the previous version of you. You are no longer living to maintain harmony at the expense of authenticity. You are living from alignment, and alignment brings a different kind of confidence, not arrogance, not rigidity, but steadiness, a grounded sense of self that does not crumble when challenged. You still feel, you still care, you still love deeply, but you no longer abandon yourself in the process. That is the true transformation. You're not becoming hardened, you're becoming anchored. You're not isolating, you are individuating. You are not withdrawing from life, you are finally entering it as yourself. The woman who once believed she had to carry everything alone is discovering that strength is not measured by how much you endure, but by how honestly you live. And when you look back at the years of overextension, of silent exhaustion, of invisible labor, you may feel grief, but you may also feel something else. Gratitude, because every moment led you here, to a place where you can sit in your own presence and feel safe, to a place where love no longer requires self-erasure, to a place where solitude is not abandonment, but sanctuary. You are no longer surviving your life, you are inhabiting it, and that changes everything. You are no longer there, not the woman who believed she was a victim of someone else's inability to love. You are no longer defined by who failed to show up for you. You are a woman who lived through a difficult story and made a decision that changed everything. You chose not to collapse under the weight of it, but to grow from it. That choice does not erase the past. It does not make everything simple. Life will still bring you challenges. There will be moments when old patterns whisper your name, when familiar fears rise like shadows at dusk. There will be days when you feel tired, when doubt creeps in quietly, when you wonder if you are truly different or simply pretending to be stronger. But something essential has shifted. You now possess awareness. And awareness changes the terrain. You have tools you did not have before. You have language for your emotions. You have the capacity to pause, to breathe, to choose instead of reacting on autopilot. That alone is a revolution. You have learned that you can feel deeply without drowning, that vulnerability does not equal destruction, that you can open your heart without abandoning yourself in the process. You can receive without disappearing. You can love without shrinking. Perhaps most importantly, you now understand that real strength has nothing to do with never falling. Real strength is falling and knowing you will rise. Not because you are forced to, not because you are trying to prove something, but because you choose to stand again. That freedom of choice, that inner sovereignty, is the quiet gift waiting at the end of a painful path. It is not loud. It is not dramatic. It does not announce itself with fireworks. It is steady, deep, unshakable. Women who walk this path carry something within them that others can sense, even if they cannot name it. A presence, a depth, a calm that cannot be easily disturbed. It is the calm of someone who has met her own darkness and survived it. The calm of someone who no longer needs to perform strength because she embodies it. You do not need to prove yourself anymore. You do not need to convince anyone of your worth. You do not need to explain why you changed. You simply are. And in that simplicity, there is more power than in all the armor you ever wore. Maybe you are at the beginning of this journey, where everything still feels raw and confusing. Maybe you are in the middle, where understanding has begun, but the struggle has not yet softened. Or maybe you are further along, recognizing yourself in these words, with a quiet nod of familiarity. Wherever you are, it is the right place. There is no wrong stage in this process. Every step counts, even the steps backward. Especially the steps backward. What feels like regression is often integration happening beneath the surface. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of individuation. Not perfection, not arrival, not a final, polished version of yourself, but a continual becoming, a gradual return to your essence, a steady shedding of what was never truly you. This path does not end. It deepens. It becomes richer, more nuanced, more honest, and it is yours alone. No one can walk it for you. No one can complete it on your behalf. The healing we are speaking of is not a return to the old normal. It is not about becoming who you were before the pain. It is about becoming someone new, someone forged by experience, softened by compassion, strengthened by awareness. A woman who has carried heavy burdens and did not break but expanded. A woman who knows what pain feels like and therefore treats herself and others with tenderness. A woman who is free, not because she has no scars, but because she has made peace with them. If you continue along this path, you will discover that your very definition of strength begins to transform. Strength is no longer about suppressing your emotions. It is about allowing them to exist without being ruled by them. Strength is not constant productivity. It is knowing when to rest. Strength is not enduring everything alone. It is recognizing when you need support and having the courage to accept it. Strength does not mean never crying. It means crying without shame. It means honoring your humanity instead of trying to transcend it. This new understanding of strength makes you flexible. You become like a tree rooted deeply in the earth, bending in the wind without snapping. You are grounded in yourself, but not rigid. You can yield without losing your core. You can soften without dissolving. That flexibility is the opposite of the hardness that once imprisoned you. The rigidity that once protected you also limited you. Now you are discovering the freedom of being both strong and soft. And then one day, quietly, you will look back. Not at a perfect life, not at a flawless transformation, but at the distance you have traveled internally. You will notice that you no longer betray yourself to keep the peace, that you recognize your limits and respect them, that you know what you need and allow yourself to ask for it. You no longer defend your humility as if it were weakness. You no longer minimize your voice to make others comfortable. You no longer apologize for taking up space in your own life. There is a dignity that begins to settle in you, not arrogance, not superiority, but quiet dignity, the kind that comes from alignment. You stand differently, you speak differently, you choose differently, and people will notice. Some will be inspired, some will be uncomfortable. Some may drift away because your new boundaries no longer accommodate their old expectations. That is not cruelty. It is clarity. You have stopped sacrificing your truth for temporary harmony. You have stopped confusing endurance with love. You have stopped believing that your worth is measured by how much you can carry. Instead, you are building a life rooted in authenticity. This does not mean you will never feel pain again. You will, but pain will no longer define you. It will pass through you instead of consuming you. You will experience moments of weakness, and instead of shaming yourself, you will respond with compassion. You will fall at times, but you will no longer stay down out of self-punishment. You will rise because you choose to. That is the difference. The old version of you rose because she had to survive. The new version rises because she honors herself. There is a profound peace in that shift. You are no longer fighting the world to prove your strength. You are no longer fighting yourself to suppress your fragility. You are integrating both, light and shadow, power and tenderness, clarity and vulnerability. That integration is maturity. You may not feel extraordinary, you may not feel transformed in a dramatic way, but beneath the surface, something irreversible has occurred. You are no longer living from fear of collapse. You are living from inner alignment. And from that place, life unfolds differently. You begin to choose relationships based on resonance rather than need. You choose work that aligns with your values rather than simply proving your competence. You create rhythms in your life that nourish you instead of deplete you. You become protective of your energy without becoming closed. You become selective without becoming isolated. You become open without becoming unguarded. And slowly, the burden you carried for so long begins to feel lighter, not because it disappeared, but because you are no longer carrying it alone. You are carrying it consciously. You are holding it with understanding instead of resentment. There is a quiet joy that emerges when you realize you are no longer at war with yourself. You do not wake up every day perfect, but you wake up aligned. You do not move through life without fear, but you move through it without self-betrayal. You do not need to be invincible anymore. You only need to be honest. And that honesty is freedom. You are not the victim of your story. You are the author of your next chapter. The archetypes within you have shifted. The wounded child is no longer abandoned. The relentless warrior has softened into a guardian. The exhausted caretaker has learned to care for herself. The woman who once overgave has learned to balance. This internal reorganization may not be visible from the outside, but its effects are profound. You act from different impulses now, from a deeper understanding of your value, from a place of wholeness instead of fragmentation. The journey is not over. In many ways, it is just beginning, but you are beginning from a new foundation. From self-respect instead of self-sacrifice, from clarity instead of confusion, from self-love instead of self-erasure. And that makes all the difference. Excuse the illusion that one day everything will suddenly make sense, that some dramatic moment will arrive like a van pulling up outside your door, announcing your healing has officially begun. That day does not arrive like that. It does not come with noise or applause. It comes quietly, almost unnoticed, and yet, when it comes, it changes. Everything. It is a simple realization, not mystical, not complicated, not wrapped in spiritual jargon. You no longer have to be strong to be loved. You no longer have to perform flawlessly to be worthy. You no longer have to carry everyone else to justify your existence. You are allowed to be human, flawed, tired, uncertain, and still be enough. You were always enough. The love you spent your life chasing does not begin outside of you. It begins in the moment you stop fighting yourself. It begins when you look at who you are, without the armor, without the performance, without the endless competence, and say, you are allowed to exist exactly like this. That realization is not the end of your journey. It is the beginning. It is the beginning of a life where you are no longer at war with yourself. A life where you are not constantly trying to prove your worth, but quietly living from the understanding that your worth was never in question. Your wounds do not disappear. They do not magically dissolve. They remain part of your story, but they stop running your life. They stop dictating your relationships. They stop shaping your choices from a place of fear. They become chapters, not the entire book. There will still be moments when doubt returns. Old fears will whisper. You will have days when you question whether you are truly healing or simply imagining progress. You will wonder if you are strong enough for this path. That is human. But now you have something you did not have before. You have an inner presence, a voice that says, I see you, I'm here, you are not alone anymore. And that voice is yours. That loving inner presence, the one you once searched for in others, has begun to live inside you. It does not shout, it does not demand, it simply stays. The relationship you build with yourself becomes the foundation of everything else. If you treat yourself with patience, you begin to treat others with patience. If you offer yourself compassion, you offer it to others without losing yourself in the process. If you respect your limits, you stop resenting the people who unknowingly cross them. You begin to give from fullness instead of from emptiness. And that changes the quality of every relationship in your life. This is not a story with a neat cinematic ending. It is not a perfect transformation. It is an ongoing process, a daily practice, a series of small decisions that seem insignificant in the moment but reshape your life over time. It is choosing to rest without guilt. It is choosing to say no without over-explaining. It is choosing to sit with your feelings instead of running from them. It is choosing yourself again and again, even when it feels unfamiliar. You are slowly becoming the woman you were meant to be before the world convinced you to shrink. Not the fantasy version, not the flawless version, the real one. And the truth is, you could not have arrived here without everything that happened. The pain shaped you. The confusion forced you inward. The loneliness taught you to find yourself. The circumstances were what they were. But now you are here, with all that you have been and all that you can still become. If you have listened this far, you already know these are not just words. They touch something inside you, something deep, something real. Maybe you feel tears, maybe anger, maybe exhaustion, maybe relief. All of it is welcome. All of it is part of the process. You are not broken. You are transforming. Transformation is not glamorous. It is quiet. It is uncomfortable. It is humbling. It asks you to let go of who you thought you needed to be. It asks you to soften where you once hardened. It asks you to feel what you once suppressed. But in that softening, something powerful happens. You become real, not impressive, not invincible, not endlessly capable, real. And real is magnetic. When you stop trying to prove yourself, you become grounded. When you stop fighting for love, you become peaceful. When you stop abandoning yourself, you become whole. The love you once begged for begins to mirror your self-respect. The relationships that once drained you no longer feel aligned. Some people will not understand the shift. They may feel the distance. They may interpret your boundaries as coldness, your calm as indifference, your silence as withdrawal. Let them. You are not required to shrink to maintain someone else's comfort. You are not required to explain your healing to those who benefited from your wounds. This is not rebellion. It is alignment. You are no longer driven by the need to be indispensable. You are driven by the need to be authentic. There is a difference. You will continue to experience life fully. There will still be heartbreak, disappointment, uncertainty, but now you move through those experiences with yourself on your side. And that changes everything. You no longer collapse internally when something goes wrong. You no longer measure your worth by someone else's behavior. You no longer assume that love must hurt to be real. You understand now, love without self-respect is not love. It is fear in disguise. You are learning to love differently. You are learning to exist without constantly scanning for approval. You are learning to breathe without bracing for impact. You are learning to sit in silence without feeling abandoned. That silence, the one that once felt suffocating, begins to feel like home. In that quiet, you meet yourself, not the strong one, not the capable one, not the savior, not the performer, just you. And you discover something extraordinary. You are enough, not when you achieve more, not when you fix everyone, not when you are needed. Now, you were always enough. Healing does not erase your humanity. It deepens it. You will still cry. You will still question yourself. You will still feel lost at times. But you will not abandon yourself in those moments. You will sit beside yourself. You will say, "This hurts." And instead of silencing that voice, you will listen. This is the most radical act of love you can offer yourself. The world may never applaud this transformation. There may be no external validation, but internally, something sacred has shifted. You no longer live from survival. You live from awareness. You no longer see your past as a curse. You see it as a teacher. You no longer wait for someone to rescue you. You stand beside yourself. And that is where real power begins. Not the loud, performative kind, the quiet kind, the steady kind, the kind that does not need to announce itself, the kind that says, without words, "I am here, I am whole, I am no longer at war with myself." That is the turning point. Not the end of your story, the beginning of living it differently. If something inside you stirred while reading this, that stirring matters. It is not random. It is your inner self recognizing its own truth. You do not have to rush the process. You do not have to have all the answers. You do not have to be perfectly healed. You only have to keep going, step by step, with yourself at your side. That is courage, and that is enough.